Chapter 2, The Turning Earth. Does it really matter if Professor Thom was right about the Neolithic builders having used the finely defined standard units of length that he called the megalithic yard? Yes, it matters a great deal. If he was wrong, the subject of statistics needs a fundamental reappraisal, but if his findings were reliable, the subject of archaeology needs equally careful reassessment. Further, if Thom was right, the development of human civilization may have to be rewritten. The authors wanted to know, one way or the other, were Alexander Thom's findings real? The truth and the earth. There were two possibilities. Either Professor Thom's megalithic yard was a genuine unit, once used by Neolithic builders, or it was an accidental consequence of statistical manipulation without any historical validity. The authors saw that the only hope of resolving the issue, once and for all, was to attempt to find a reason why this length of unit would have had meaning for Neolithic builders, and then to identify a methodology for reproducing such a length at different locations. It was a tall order, and failure to find a potentially meaningful origin of the megalithic yard and a feasible means of reproduction would still not confirm that it was a fabrication. Conversely, they recognised that success would not sufficiently prove that the measurement was real. They had to admit that they had a starting point that suggested that Thom was correct, because Allen's previous research had led him to believe that the megalithic yard was and is a geodetic unit. This means that it was derived from the geometry of the Earth itself. Specifically, it was based on the polar circumference of the planet. After studying evidence from the Minoan culture that had developed on the Mediterranean island of Crete some 4,000 years ago, Allen had concluded that the Minoan astronomer priests had regarded a circle as having 366 degrees rather than 360 degrees that we use today. The evidence also suggested that the megalithic culture of Britain had done the same. Chris studied Allen's earlier findings, that's the other author, closely and could see a logical reason why any astronomical based culture might consider that there should be 366 degrees in a circle, for the very good reason that there are 366 rotations of the Earth in a year. Chris's reasoning was straightforward. Everyone accepts that there are approximately 365 quarter solar days in a year, and because we cannot have a quarter of a real day, our modern calendar has 365 days to the year, with an extra leap day at the end of February every fourth year. There are also other subtle correctional mechanisms, for example adding a leap year in millennium years but not in century years, designed to smooth out the oddities of the astronomical system that governs the progress of perceived time for daily purpose. While we are all relaxed about having a 365 day, most people do not realize that the Earth actually makes just over 366 turns on its axis during the same period. Such devoted sun, moon and star watchers as the Neolithic people of the British Isles and surrounding areas would have been acutely aware of the difference between the 365 day year and the 366 turns of the planet in a year. One difference was the day of the sun and the other of the stars. Solar and sidereal days. There are various ways of defining a day, and the two principal types are what we now call a solar day and a sidereal day. A solar day is that measured from the zenith, the highest point of the sun, on 2 consecutive days. The average time of the sun's daily passage across the year is called a mean solar day. It is this type of day that we use for our timekeeping today. A sidereal day is the time it takes for one revolution of the planet, measured by observing a star returning to the same point in the heavens on 2 consecutive nights. This is a real revolution because it is unaffected by the secondary motion of the Earth's orbit around the Sun. This sidereal day or rotation period is 230 seconds shorter than a mean solar day, and over the year these lost seconds add up to exactly 1 extra day, giving a year of just over 366 sidereal days in terms of the Earth's rotation about its axis. In short, anyone who gauges the turning of the Earth by watching the stars would know full well that the planet turns a little over 366 times in a year. So it follows that this number would have great significance for such star watchers. If they consider each complete turn of the Earth to be 1 degree of the great circle of heaven within which the sun, moon and planets move, then they would logically accept that there are 366 degrees in a circle. There really are 366 degrees in the most important circle of them all, the Earth's yearly orbit of the sun. Anything else is an arbitrary convention. It seemed to the authors that this was so logical that the 360-degree circle may have been a later adjustment to make arithmetic easier, as it is divisible by far more numbers than the real number of degrees in a year. In other words, the circle of geometry has become somehow detached from the circle of heaven. How right the authors were, and the truth of the situation would become all too clear to them as their research progressed. Having satisfied themselves that Allen's conclusion about a 366-degree Neolithic circle was at least tenable, they returned to the issue of the megalithic yard being a geodetically derived concept. If it was indeed geodetic in origin, it was implicit that the Neolithic peoples of Western Europe had measured and understood the polar circumference of the Earth. At first view, this may sound far-fetched, but it is not. In their opinion, it is not unreasonable to assume that the astronomer priests of this period did indeed achieve this feat. Few, if any, experts deny that many megalithic sites were created for sky watching. Any culture that spent dozens of centuries studying the interplay of solar, lunar and stellar movements must surely have come to understand that Earth is a giant ball. In the process, it could quite readily have gained sufficient knowledge to gauge the Earth's size. So have these ancient megalithic builders proved that the Earth is actually a globe and not flat? That would be interesting to find out. Given that, and how did they do that? Given that the human brain has enjoyed its current level of intellectual processing power for tens of thousands of years, it has to be acknowledged that prehistory must have had its share of individuals with the imagination and insight of Isaac Newton or Albert Einstein. It is not outlandish, therefore, to assume that the megalith builders would have established the true nature of the Earth, including measuring its dimension using simple observational astronomy. Indeed, the Greek mathematician Eratosthenes is said to have single-handedly calculated the polar circumference of the Earth in 250 BC to an accuracy of 99% without the considerable benefit of thousands of years of concentrated observational astronomy known to have been conducted by the people who built such sites as Stonehenge in England. All this deduction seemed fair, but one troublesome fact did cause the authors to wince a little. Having decided that there was no insurmountable difficulty in measuring the polar circumference of the planet in order to subdivide it into integer whole numbers units, they had to accept that the people concerned must have possessed a reliable unit of linear measure prior to the megalithic yard. Some presently unknown unit simply had to be in place to measure the polar circumference before this great distance could be recalibrated into a more useful geodetic subdivision. After some thought, the authors realized that this was not a problem at all. All they had to do was think about the relatively recent past to understand how the history of human endeavour repeats itself in facts. If facts become lost. The 18th century French team that devised the metric system had done exactly the same thing in that they measured the polar circumference of the Earth in old French linear units before they could create the metre, which was then defined as 1/40,000,000th of the circumference of the circle that passed through both poles. What 18th century Europeans could achieve, so too could the star watchers of the Neolithic period. But the realization does add another level of surprising expertise to these otherwise apparently unsophisticated people. Beautiful equations. The author's next question was, what is the modern estimate of the polar circumference of the Earth? Given that our planet has an uneven surface and is not entirely regular in every north-south cross section, it would appear to be almost impossible to give an absolutely precise measurement for its polar dimension. Inevitably, estimates vary slightly, but the most common value quoted is 40,008 kilometers, a distance that converts to 48,221,838 megalithic yards, MY. Their hypothetical 366-degree polar circumference would therefore give them 131,754 megalithic yards per degree, a number that does not sound very special. But Allen, one of the authors, had reasons to believe that these early mathematicians had subdivided each degree into minutes and seconds of arc, part of the circumference of a circle, just as we do today. In this distance, however, it appears they fixed upon 60 minutes to each degree of arc and 6 seconds to a minute of arc. This produced the following result: full circle of the Earth. Well, that did not look too exciting, nor did the next two steps. 1 degree at a 366th part, 1 minute at a 60th part. But the final breakdown was truly remarkable. 1 second, a 6th part, equals 366 megalithic yards. According to this assumed system of 366-degree geometry, each second of arc of the entire planet is an amazingly precise 366 megalithic yard in length. It is incredibly neat, but is it real? An astounding coincidence, the my known foot. Taking Thom's megalithic yard of 0.829656 meters, they authors could reverse engineer the process by multiplying it by 366 by 6 times 60 times 366, giving a supposed planetary circumference of a little under 40,010 kilometers. This is less than 0.005% away from our modern estimate, and it was so close as to be negligible. While there are no decipherable records from the Neolithic period to confirm the use of this method of geometry, there is strong circumstantial evidence to suggest that the 366 times 60 times 6 principle of geometry was used by the Minoan culture that existed on the Mediterranean island of Crete 4,000 years ago, which overlapped the time of the Neolithic cultures of Britain and France. Canadian archaeologist Professor J. Walter Graham of Princeton University discovered that a standard unit of length had been employed in the design and construction of palaces on Crete dating from the Minoan period. Around 2000 BC, Graham dubbed this unit a Minoan foot, which he stated was equal to 30.36 centimeters. This length held no particular significance for Professor Graham, as he had no reason to compare it to the units Thom claimed to have found on the other side of Europe. It dawned on these two authors, though, as they looked at Professor Graham's findings, that there was something more than significant about the size of the Minoan foot when looking at it in conjunction with the megalithic yard and megalithic geometry. Imagine their surprise when they realized that 1 second of arc in the assumed megalithic system, 366 MY, is equal to 303.6577 meters, which is exactly 1,000 Minoan feet, given that Graham did not provide a level of accuracy greater than 1/10 of a millimeter. This fit could just be a very, very strange coincidence, but it had to be noted that several researchers now believe that the Minoan culture of Crete had ongoing contact with the people who were the megalithic builders of the British Isles. It seemed highly unlikely that 366 MY, or megalithic yards, and 1,000 Minoan feet should both fit the author's hypothetical megalithic second of arc so perfectly by sheer chance, given that they both appear to spring from the same geodetically sound principle. They were now feeling increasingly confident that the megalithic yard was a real unit of length.